session. I'm very delighted to be here. I don't know what it is. Well, I do know what it is that I felt when I walked in here. I've never attended a book festival, perhaps where there's such close proximity between the audience and the stage. And for me, that was very significant. There was an intimacy. There was something very profound that I experienced. Maybe it's looking at this beautiful gathering of what I hope will be a successful, enduring, and thriving endeavor. And I do want to congratulate the organizers. This was a very powerful, powerful moment for me as I walked in. So I'm talking to two people who have written about their lives. And in writing about their lives, there's an inward looking, remembering, narratives that I could identify with, because there were certain themes that you touched on that resonated with me, that I've experienced myself. But we'll break them all down, and at some point, I'll open the floor for questions. I often don't give a whole biography or profile of the guest, because I think you can Google that. That's why you're here, because you know who they are. So let's just get started. Khaya, Dlanga, and Malaika wa Azania, welcome. And I'm Redi Tlhabi. I'm nervous, Redi Tlhabi, but let's go. So, let me start with you, Khaya. You've written a memoir, and that is a genre that I'm particularly passionate about, because it is about preserving your story, making yourself vulnerable. Many people believe that all forms of writing are autobiographical. Even in fiction, there is some autobiography involved, but a memoir is that. But something that is unique about a memoir is that you can't write about an entire life. You have to pick a story in that entire life. When we look at your book, what made you decide to focus on that particular story? Why was that compelling?
Yeah, again, I just want to say thank you to the organizers, because this is such a significant moment, I think, in history. Yeah. And I really hope that moving forward, we will continue supporting this, I think, as much as we can. And I think that it's imperative in order for us to continue telling our own stories and not letting other people tell, African stories. For me, it's interesting, because I didn't want to tell my story, because my publisher actually asked me to tell the story. And
everyone says that.
No, I promise you, I have emails to prove that. And where I literally, for about a year and a half, and I refused to tell my story, because I think we have, as black people, or myself, let's speak for myself, is that we have been made to feel insecure about telling our own stories. That maybe our stories are not worth being told, or if we think they're worth being told, we think they're not worth being heard. And that was my point of view. And I had all these excuses. I haven't done anything. I have not achieved anything of significance. Why am I writing about my life? Who the hell do I think I am, to do that? And then I remembered hearing a talk that I went to where, former President Beki was speaking. And he said that, Africans need to tell their own stories. It's not up to others to tell our stories, because then they will dictate how the world sees us, because it is them telling us our stories. And I thought, okay, well, I might as well go ahead and tell my story. And funny enough, my story, I didn't really have a particular angle in terms of writing the story. But what I found as I was writing it was how connected I was to my mother in the story. And what a lot of people talk about when they talk to me, they say, you write quite a lot about your mother in the story, and I also write quite a bit about my grandmother and a little bit about my maternal grandmother. Yes. But what is quite fascinating when I was writing, I found that I had more stories to tell about my grandfathers than my grandmothers. Even though I had more proximity, closer proximity to my grandmothers than I did. For example, my paternal grandfather, my grandmother had written this story, historical kind of something like 6 pages about my grandfather's life, and he died long before I was born. And yet she had this story recorded about his life, but she recorded nothing about her own life, which I found very
Nobody
interesting.
recorded anything about her own life.
And no one recorded about it. Yeah. So I found that really, really interesting, and I think I made a conscious decision to actually write about my mother when I got into that realization, quite significantly, I suppose, about my mother, even though the story was supposed to be about me.
So Khaya has started a very strong theme in your own book, writing about your grandmother and your mother. We'll get to that in a moment, but I do want to know the same question to you. The process of deciding which would be the most compelling chapter of your life. Because you write about born free, you subvert the whole notion of a rainbow nation. Why was that so important?
I think it was important, specifically because of the time, right? You will remember that, let me explain this first. In 2013, when the book was started, I had been financially excluded from university. I was supposed to go into my second year at Rhodes University, and I was financially excluded. And I remember Rhodes, normally we open in February, right? So January would be the period where you would, you deal with things like your MIPs, you're supposed to pay the fees and things like that. And I remember around January in 2013, I was sending emails to Rhodes University every day, guys, please, begging and pleading, and I don't have 20,000 rands, please give me a chance, blah, 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 and all of that, right? And this went on for about a month. And obviously the response was the same every time. We owe the fees, you can't come back to the university, and blah, 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 and, let's see, generally the whole response of what they say when you don't have money to go to school. And I actually wrote Memoirs of a Born Free quite upset. I was quite upset when I was writing that book. Because it was during that period when I was excluded that I began to reflect a lot on what it means to be a black child in this South Africa that they claim is a born free, or to be a born free, so-called born free in this so-called rainbow nation that is South Africa. And so for me, it was not so much about specifically picking what particular story to tell about my life, but more a product of a reflection that came about as a result of that exclusion from Rhodes University. And after the whole, manuscript was done and the whole process was done, and by the way, I did not want to have that book published, and Kando is my witness. In fact, I had, my witness is right here, because I had written it and I was quite very insecure about it. It's interesting that Khaya is speaking about this, but I was insecure about it, and I thought, nah, this is crap, I'm not going to write this, nobody will read this, and all of that. And I told Tando, one day, I don't know what came over me, I confided in Tando, I said, hey Tando, I wrote this thing, but this thing is kind of a bit crappy, I can't even send it to you. And Utando, before he even read the book himself, the manuscript itself, called Tabiso and said to Tabiso, there is this young girl in Soweto, and she has written something. Please go and harass her until she gives it to you. I've not read it and I've not seen it, but I think you must go and get this thing from this young girl. And it took months, it took months for me to actually find it. Tando saying, Malaika, get it out, get it out. And it took quite a number of months, and finally I did. But for me, when I was writing that, I never wrote it initially with the intention of it being a book, more than reflections on all of these things and roads and everything that came out. And it was only after that that I'd given the manuscript to Tabi so that it really came out and it looked like a book. It still does.
And we better for it, I must say. I suppose it was in preparation for this session that I looked at the books as two entities that were in conversation with each other. Your frustration, your anger comes out when you write. And in our Khaya, one doesn't want to diminish the depth of your own suffering and your trials and what you've overcome. But I couldn't help noticing that, or picking up for myself as a reader, that you end on a very triumphant note. You've overcome these massive odds. And perhaps for you, the dream has been attained. And yet for you, it's been elusive. You subvert the whole idea of a rainbow nation. You're shaking your head, Khaya. You don't agree with that.
No.
And sorry, before I even say that, even looking at the reviews of the book, it will be, oh, this is inspirational, against all odds, the new South Africa, this is what it can do for you. But at the same time, I'm saying that I do not want to diminish the depth of your struggle.
I think it really annoys me when I hear that.
Get annoyed, go ahead.
And it really frustrates me because the reason it frustrates me is because it is not true. It is not true for any black person, I think, in this country to say that I've been triumphant. Because none of us have reached any point of triumph. And which is why at the last chapter of my book, it's talking about my luck and my sadness. And what I really talk about is the fact that I happen to come from a family that understood the value of an education in the village in Dlamini, where, it's literally, when I remember reading Mandela, and I'm reading this book, Mandela lived exactly the same existence I had 6 years ago, and then I was living the same life. How is that progress? And over and above that, so now just because I'm in a corporate environment doesn't mean I've succeeded. Yes. I think the perception is that I have succeeded because I am in a corporate environment, but I have certain challenges that I have to face. Yes. One, the fact that, my accent isn't white enough. And number two, I don't have qualifications. Number three, I say whatever the hell I like in the office, and I write what I want to write. And I say certain things that make people uncomfortable, and therefore that in some ways probably restricts my upward trajectory in corporate. So the notion or the idea that there is some kind of triumph is completely false. And I think it's really how I suppose people want to perceive what success is. And for me, there is no triumph. I'm still struggling as, maybe in a different way. And it's not the same as maybe another person, but there is no triumph. There is nothing to be applauded here.
Just on that, Khaya, the fact that your experience of your circumstances is that the pain was there and the pain doesn't go away, and that living in the streets or not having access to food or whatever it is, we can't normalize that. But equally, if I understand you correctly, we can't normalize an escape from the street as having arrived, because there's so much more, there's so many other gray areas and so many other struggles that are maybe abstract, that people don't see. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying, because the real truth, even though South Africa is it's weird. I always say that, we are a minority, right? We're a majority as black people in South Africa. But the truth is we're a minority, because money is the majority. And because we don't have the money, we are a minority. So we can't make decisions. We cannot, we don't own the land. We own less than 5% of the economy. How can we say we have triumphed? And I think for me, there's a question that constantly resonates with me. And the fact that now, I want to diverge a little. There was a guy who wrote, some white guy, I don't know where he was from. He wrote, I think some article said, "Can I, as a white man, tell Khaya Dlanga how to write a memoir?"
Oh, I remember that.
And so he's writing this whole book and this thing, and I was so upset by it. And I was like, what is happening here is that you have someone who is trying to gatekeep how stories are told. Yeah. So because I'm a white person, I need to tell black people how to tell their stories. And not only that, how we should tell our stories, but it is who decides who those stories tells those stories. And one of the things that I tell, in this the second edition of my book, is how my book was on the bestseller list, and initially as very impressed. I was very happy. So I look at this list. There are 88 books on this list, right? Bestsellers. And mine is number 88. It is the only one by a black living writer on that list. The other two, Gumandela, Long Walk to Freedom. Number 2, I Write What I Like. Now, we live in a black country. How come you have stories? You have one story that is made it onto the onto the bestseller list in a majority black country. So, and for me, these are the real big frustrations when when I hear about we have not triumphed. And I think from that is maybe that is the one mistake that I would probably lash myself over, is the fact that maybe it is my fault. I cannot blame the reader. Is how my book was received, was that it is about this from rags to riches story when there are actually no riches. So it's still rags.
Let's talk about that, the Rainbow Nation and the Born Free, because that is the big theme in your book. And the reason I go there now is because we are having conversations about what does this Rainbow Nation actually mean. What does it mean to be born free? It's a fallacy. It is an absolute lie. Tell me about the process of shaking up the narrative. And what I mean by that is, you write a book about popular themes, right? Popular themes that have been embraced, that have been entrenched, where it is perhaps unpopular to say the Rainbow Nation doesn't exist. It's a politically incorrect thing to say. And to add to that, you have the burden of a generation or generations that came before you that to a very large extent likes telling young people like yourself that you don't know what it's like. You don't know how he suffered. You don't know how it was like to not have an education, the dompas and all of that. And to be that voice that says, I know that was your struggle, it is my struggle too, but recognize another chapter in this continuum.
Look, I mean, I think it's not an accident of history that in the last 3 or 4 years you've had quite a lot of things happening, right, with regards to this so-called born-free generation. I mean, you've had Hughs must fall, you've had roads must fall, you had, these students in high schools fighting over, issues of the hair and all of that. And you've had these very important conversations about what it means to be young and to be black in the so-called Rainbow Nation that is South Africa. And these conversations, I mean, Members of the Born Free, locates itself in these. You really can't even say, and I even argue that, I think it's I've often heard people say things like, fees must fall, the strength of fees must fall lies in the fact that it was a spontaneous movement. I think those are crappy things to say, I think roads must fall as a spontaneous movement, and that's the strength where it lies. These are crappy things. And I think that if a person, a young black person born and raised here in South Africa, knows, and I think many of us know, I'm saying this as a young person who grows up in a township and goes to a multiracial school, but I'm also talking about young people who may have not even lived at all in the township, grew up all their lives in these multiracial schools and grew up all their lives in the burbs and all of that. We do have a lot of commonalities and similarities in our struggles, even when we've had different experiences and different spaces in which we've existed over time. And I think that, it is important. This moment, there's this thing that's going on in South Africa. I've not found a word. I don't want to call it a revolution yet. I don't want to get too overly excited. But I think there's a rupture that has taken place in this country over the past few years. And at the heart of that rupture is this generation of so-called born-free people, right? And I think one of the reasons why this happens is precisely because of what you are raising, right? That we've been born, raised, and this is not me specific, but many of my peers, we are born, raised, and told that you are the generation that is born free, and you've had better things, and you've had a better life, and so on. And I think for quite a long time we've perhaps maybe kept quiet and said nothing about this. And in my book I speak about that when my mom would say to me, I'm doing all of this for you. I'm taking you to this former multiracial school, former Model C school, because I'm doing this for you, and I've worked so hard, and I want you to get the best out of life, and all of these things. And at that time, I couldn't say anything to my mom, right? Because there was also this burden of gratitude that we had, right? This thing that, I'm one of the few guys who can go to school and take a better blazer. And, so my mother is working hard. Yes, in the as a prefect, and, there must be something, and my mother is working so hard. My mom worked very, very hard, right? And she's that beautiful lady at the back there in the blue. That's my mom. And I'm sorry, I'm going to just before I continue, just a minute. Can I just take a minute of your time, Redi, and say this, right? So in 1991, two young people who at the time they met Kokosas, Ilimakom Redi, the activist, and all of that, and sometime in 1991. They decided that they were going to make love and they're not going to use protection. And they were young people and they had me, and it's okay. She doesn't mind. She doesn't mind. She really doesn't. So they decided, these young people who were still in matric, that they were going to, and Malaika came along the way. And in October of that year, these two young people sat down, and this one decided, the father decided that, I'm going to Wits, and I'm going to pursue my studies, and I'm going to go into my undergrad, and he went all the way to masters. I'm going to Wits, and that's it. And you are stuck with this thing of yours. And this woman, who by the way was much smarter than my dad, decided that she's going to stay and take care of this child, and she's going to, postpone her own studies. She's going to stop, and she's going to go and work in the NGO sector, wherever she could work. And she did that and postponed a lot of her dreams to raise the child. So I think, we often don't talk about these things that our mothers in particular have done for us, and at least for me, my mother. And I think my mother is an exceptional woman, guys. I really do. I think she's amazing, and I think, can you just give her a round of applause? She's so amazing. So I think it's an issue of the moment, right? And an issue of an important conversation that we had not been having for quite a long time, but also some kind of a awakening of this generation. And I think it's a generation thing, by the way, right? I do think somebody once said to me, it's because courage skips a generation. That you guys, you almost embody this generation, yeah, Parama 1976. But before then, generations before then were not as radical and as wild as all of that, right? But I think that this moment was inevitable, right? It was inevitable. It may not have been Malaika who wrote Members of the Born Free. I still insist it may not have been Malaika who wrote Members of it could have been anybody else, but Members of the Born Free was going to come out. Yeah. Because this is a story about the lives of black people who continue as black young people, so-called Born Free generation, that finds itself negotiating a very difficult space at a very difficult time. It just so happened Malaika wrote it, but any other child could have written that story. And I think that's
both of you, I'll start with you, Khaya. You have spent a considerable amount of time talking about our stories, black stories. If we don't write, other people will tell our stories. Reading both your books, listening to the previous session as well, the powerful people who have informed our history in very profound ways, and reflecting on the philosophers who have become very famous all over the world, whether they're from Europe or from Greece or wherever, and the things that they write about, whether it's Plato, Socrates, Descartes, Foucault, whatever it is they write about, they have been given the privilege to create the theory, to theorize about their lives, about other people's lives. And sometimes when one reads them, you think, but this is happening where I live. This is a story that is extremely familiar, but you've given it a name, good for you. But how do we take our stories beyond just documenting them, beyond just writing about our lived experience? How do we theorize about our lives? How do we create theoretical frameworks through which this lived experience can be analyzed and critiqued by future generations? And I suppose that's now my mission. I'm very passionate about that it's not just about saying so-and-so was born here, this is what they experienced, this is their struggle. Because you read all these historical books that have won awards, that are being taught all over university, and you think, come on man, that's Babusman Mani next door. That's exactly who I think about when I look at this theory or this philosophy.
I mean, look, maybe you would need to explain to me what you mean when you say theorize. You know, I mean, are you talking about the way in which we're going to analyze these books and perhaps draw from it some sense of
it being school of thought, yaga bani bani, school of thought, yaga, you know.
Pardon?
I'm not saying yes. I'm
Oh, no, okay.
Yo.
Yeah.
Hey, look, man, I battle a lot with that, right? I battle a lot with this idea that, I mean, because if, for example, we were to say we're going to theorize, or like you're saying, give it a kind of an ideological name, whatever you want to say, about something that I wrote, what would you call it? Because like I say, we draw a lot from the experiences, we draw a lot from the thinking, we draw a lot from the lived experiences of so many people before us, and many people even after. So would I write Members of the Born Free and say, you know, we have developed this Malaikaism going on, you know? and does Khaya say there's a Khayaism going on? And this Khayaism, by the way, borrows a lot from Tangaremba, from Ndadu next door, every time. I borrow from that, I borrow from my mom, I borrow from Biko, I borrow from Tangaremba, from all these people. I don't know if I'm very interested in my work being a Malaikaism. Doesn't even sound nice, Malaikaism. I'm a Malaikaist. It doesn't even sound nice, you know. But I mean, still, I don't think it's something I'm very particularly very. I mean, I've never thought about it. It's not something I'm particularly very. I wouldn't really invest my time in wanting to create this theoretical and ideological understanding of my work or things like that, because I think it would be very difficult, because where exactly do we draw the line between what is Malaika's authentic, like I'm saying, Members of the Born Free could have been anybody's book. So what is it about it that would make it authentically Malaika such that it should be named as a theory brought about or constructed by this Malaika person? I don't think my work is a work that can ever become a Marxist type of work or anything like that.
No, I do respect that. I do respect that, and perhaps that's a conversation for another day. But I really believe that some of the literature that we've been taught at school, at university, the reason that it has endured is because certain scholars came through and analyzed it, reflected it through different prisms. And I suppose as somebody who's very interested in sexual violence, studying female genital mutilation, all of that, I'm finding that the events, the experiences are happening in a different part of the world, and other people are creating the theory for those experiences. So I suppose that's the idea that I was going at. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, but I do respect your point of view. Yeah?
I think really that's just up to the scholars, you know, to decide, you know, what they decide to focus on, what they do. Because, you know, I always think about, you know, my mother and how she would never call herself a feminist, because I don't think she knows what that is. But for her, it's about living it. For example, I mean, I always remember, this is one of the strongest memories as a child I have of my mother. And, you know, she'd come to visit us, you know, from Emwot, and because we lived in the village with my grandparents. And so this one day, she decides that she's going to get on a horse and ride this horse in the village and go to the next village. Now, no one had ever seen a woman on a horse in my village when my mother rode that horse. And the entire village came to a standstill, literally people on the side of the road watching my mother on this horse, because I'd never seen a woman ride a horse. So, and I think for me there's just certain things that happen, and it is up to the academics to decide to name them and do things. For our responsibilities, I think, as writers and all of that, is to tell the stories that we have and make sure that the stories don't get buried, that they don't die, because we all have the stories to tell. And if we don't tell them, what will the academics publish?
But I suppose my question was less about a name, but rather a marking of a moment, because your mother who's riding a horse, and Thelma, is that an English name, Thelma? I don't know. A Thelma who's riding a horse in another part of the world, and then being written about as the first woman to ever do this, when Khaya's mother has been doing it for so many years. I suppose that's exactly where I was going with that. But let's just talk about the women in your lives, because they've got very strong and loud and formidable voices in your books. You've just talked about your mother, and I'm very blessed that I don't know anyone in my life whose mother or grandmother has not played a superlative role in their lives. So I could certainly identify with that. But what is it about that? What is it about the lives of women, that story and then you, and yet there is this umbilical cord, this umbilical connection between the generations? In other words, I have my grandmother who's still alive, she's 90 years old. I have my mother who's 65 years old. I'm here, I'm 38 years old. But I can track their struggles and find mine in tracking theirs. They can track their struggles and see some of what I battle with, see themselves in some of what I battle with. So what I'm getting at is vastly different lives that you lead, and yet the umbilical cord is there. What is the umbilical cord apart from being related to them? What are the common struggles?
I mean, I think you are going to find a lot of similar stories, or a thread, a common denominator with the story of my mom, the story of my grandmother, and myself. And I mean, I didn't speak as far as my great-grandmother, but you would find a common thread even there. And I think it largely has to do with the society in which these women are located, right? That even today, there are struggles that we face today in the South Africa in 2016, in this very patriarchal society, that in 1976, 1967, in 1953, and all of that, women were facing at the time. So I mean, I think it is not so much an issue of, that we've got different experiences, or that we lived in different epochs rather, does not negate the fact that we lived in all these different epochs that all have got a common denominator, that we live in a patriarchal society. And in a patriarchal society, women are going to have common experiences. And it doesn't matter if that's a patriarchal society with me born in 1991, or with my mother who was born in 1970 something, right? Because in all of those societies, certain things are done to women, certain expectations are put on women, certain experiences are particular to women that continue to manifest even in societies as they go on. So I think you are right that there are a lot of things that are very common, and there are even things I didn't speak about in the book that are common across the entire generation of the Mahlatsi family, that are all a result of the patriarchal society in which we are located in, and which doesn't matter which epoch or which decade we were all born in. So I think that's...
And I went there deliberately with you because in the same way as you would put race as an issue, as something that is unique, that black people have experienced throughout the ages all over the world, patriarchy is also the same. How a young black woman also experiences patriarchy. And I often get very pissed off when one is invited to 9th of August celebrations, and living in a country where there's this violent expression of male power in the form of sexual violence and all of that. I often feel disempowered when I'm feeling weak, but you pick myself up again and you fight, whether through the pen or your mouth, your words, whatever it is. But I think that it's also quite important to document how modern women, how young women are also experiencing the patriarchy, and that the patriarchy is just as violent as it was then, that you may not be relegated to the kitchen, but it is there and we breathe it every single day of our lives. So thank you for going there. Khaya, again, strong presence of the women in your life, the voices of those women. Just take me through that journey about what they mean to you and how they experience the world, and how that has influenced you as a man.
It's quite interesting because I think as a man you don't know that, and even when you, it's very interesting in the sense that when you're looking at your mother, because we're all, most of us I'd say, raised by our mothers, very strong women, and we always talk about how powerful and strong these women are. And yet we somehow as men manage to isolate them as the only, that they are an exception somehow to womanhood. Okay? Whereas, and I think it's something that we only think about, I think, at a much later stage in life. And I think, so when I look back, I've said some pretty, some things that when I look back, I'm pretty shocked that I've said those things. And specifically because, I've been called out on those things, right? Because you always know, but my mother is different, or my sister is different. But that is not the case. And I think for me, when I look at my mother, and when I look at my grandmother, when I look at my aunt, when I look at my friends' mothers, and what they've gone through and what they've done for them, I really don't understand how then we as men continue to, to subject women the way we continue to. Because we know, we've seen, our mothers being abused. We have seen our mothers being made less than. And it's not even about that, the fact that they are mothers. And it's actually quite an emotional subject for me, because I know that my mother, for example, or the women in my life, have always been much more influential in my life than the men in my life. So why then will I make certain jokes that seem like they're normal? Whereas I know that the lives of women are completely contrary to what I'll continue to say. It's a very difficult, subject matter for me to say, because I have, for example, one of the things I'll never forget is how my grandfather would always say, Kaules, so that one fast, right? Or and that's what it says about it fast. As if there's something wrong with being a woman, right? And so you grow up thinking that, okay, well, there's something wrong with the word like a woman, eating like a woman. Because if you're eating slowly, you're being like a woman. If you're walking slow, you're being like a woman. So there must be something wrong with that. And so it gets hammered, I think, onto you as a child, and you think that it is okay to think that there's something wrong with being a woman. And I think it's something that we have to, it's going to take a while, and I think it takes every single individual man to get over that. And I don't know how long it will take us to teach those behind us, and also ourselves. Because it is not an easy, I don't think it will take a generation. I don't think it's going to take 2 generations, because we are so ingrained in our society that, like, when you think you're not being sexist, I don't think that we as men truly understand how sexist we are. Even when we think we're truly liberated and we understand the plight of women. It's pretty painful.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm listening to Khaya, and I'm thinking to myself that, this idea that, things like patriarchy or things like racism are things that individuals can unlearn. And, it's up to an individual to, we have to overcome this as individuals and all of that. I don't know, really, if I particularly agree with that, right? Because I think when we begin to enter into a discussion about things like patriarchy being unlearned by a man suddenly coming to the realization that it's wrong and taking the conscious decision by himself, we want to reduce this thing to being an individual thing. Almost the same thing we do with racism, right? That, oh no, but this white person is not like other white people. It's a different type of white person. So this is a different type of man, right? This is a man who has unlearned patriarchy. But what we don't talk about is the structures that exist that continue to perpetuate and enable men to be that way. And I don't think, personally for me, really, I would celebrate a man who says to me he has unlearned patriarchy and that's it, I've overcome. Because I don't think patriarchy is a thing to be overcome. The same way racism is not a thing to be overcome. Because this is not just merely a feeling or a character or thing that you feel and you can overcome. We're talking here about structural constructs that are very deeply rooted and embedded in a system that must be fought beyond overcoming like that. But that's just me. And I may be wrong. I may be wrong.
You're not. Not at all.
Somebody's very pleased. All right. So, Khaya, coming back, I'm still talking. In fact, let me start with you, Azania. Malaika. It's okay. It's beautiful. Yeah. How do we reflect these women that you've described, who've played a role in your lives, your grandmothers, your mothers? How do we then speak about them without normalizing their pain and their abuse that they've experienced at the altar of patriarchy? And I suppose I'm ambushing the space because it's a personal conflict for me. It's a personal conflict for me because while I want to celebrate the single mother who raised me and did everything for me, I'm not persuaded that this story is complete, and I don't know whether by continuing to celebrate her, I'm saying to the world, this is doable. Yes. A woman can do it. A woman can do it, but I think, should she? Should we accept that this is how we're going to live? Should we accept that as we open the different memoirs, we again and again are going to see these strong women who have moved the world? But they moved the world not because they woke up and said, this is how I'm going to live, but they moved the world because here was the world and it had to be moved at that time. So I don't know. I don't know whether I celebrate them or in celebrating them, I'm entrenching what is actually an unfair.
I don't think it's a contradiction. I mean, and I was actually made aware of this a few months ago. You know, when the story of these girls at, I think it was Parktown girls, who were fighting about the issue of the hair and all of that, you know, Pretoria girls are, yes. And I said, I wrote an update, right? And it became a reflection for me based on the comments that came out. And I said, you know, I don't know if, as a society, we should celebrate and hail 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds as revolutionaries, and you know, we had their photos up, you know, people that were on our profile pictures, and the, you know, the Lillian Goy of our time, and you know, Audre Lorde of our time, and Angela Davis, Asata Shaku is reborn, and all of that, and we're talking about 12-year-old kids, right? And if the kids were supposed to be kids, if the kids were not supposed to be out there being revolutionaries and fighting and all of that, right? And yet this is the society that these kids have inherited, and it's a struggle they are waging in this society. Now someone said to me something quite very interesting, and said to me, just a guy called Tim, because he said to me, but we are not celebrating the fact that these kids are facing the struggle and they're waging the struggle. What we are saying, we're not celebrating that these kids are waging the struggle. There's nothing to celebrate about this. This is very, you know, unjust that kids should be, you know, facing this kind of struggle, waging the struggle in this generation. Where are the parents and where have we been and what does the society say and so on and so forth. But he says it is the strength that these kids have. It says something also about where these kids come from, that they've got the ability to stand up and fight. In a society that has rendered them people who shouldn't even, and people who should never, people which has rendered them invisible, and which has rendered them a society that would otherwise have rendered many unable to even fight, that these kids continue to do so, knowing even the privileges they would lose in the process, right? And I think for me, when we celebrate, and it's not even so much about a celebration of more than it is an acknowledgement of the struggles that the single parents and our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers have had to wage. And it doesn't, for me, it's not a contradiction, because I don't think that's, for me, is a point to say it takes away our agency, that we should say, hey, single mothers must continue being single mothers and it's a great thing and I celebrate this and so on and so forth. I do think that for me, it is a point to say we acknowledge that this society has placed upon women this kind of burden. But it is from this struggle that they are waging that we should draw from our own experience and use our own agency to rewrite this narrative that makes women. I don't think it's something we just say there is single mothers and it ends there and it's okay for Fellamo. I think that would be problematic. But I think if you're saying these single mothers who have raised us in this problematic society, and this is a very problematic thing, and we have got the agency, we should exercise an agency, even in this problematic society, to fight against constructs that normalize this kind of thing. For me, that's where the source of the strength and the power comes from. Not so much as saying they're single mothers and that's cool. It isn't. And it's not cool because I've seen what a single mother has to go through. I've seen what my mother has had to do. I've seen my mother having to sell muhodu next door and all of that to put me through school. I've seen some of the most horrendous things. And my mother has never cried in front of me, right? But she doesn't know I've seen her cry many times. I'd walk into a room and I'd find her crying, and she doesn't know I've ever seen that. She doesn't know. She thinks I've never seen her cry, because that's what she presented herself to me all the time, because she had to be strong for me, no one else was. But because I've seen that, right, I can never celebrate and say being a single mother is this great, extraordinary thing. I've seen far too much and experienced far too much from a single parent to know that there is nothing revolutionary or to celebrate about something like that, but we draw strength from that.
Oh, yes.
Okay, we are going to open the floor for questions in just a few minutes, but I do want to deal with another theme. You did touch on it, it's not new, exclusion. And my definition of it is another form of brutality, the different types of brutality, right? One that can make you bleed, one that is visible, one that can cause a spectacle, but there's the silent bit. And I think you've both experienced it in different ways, not belonging. And I wonder what that now means, that when you are an outcast, what is it that is wrong? The state of being an outcast, or the structure that allows that determines who comes in and who comes out? And I wonder how we change all of that. Khaya?
Just to touch on the previous point is that, again, it's not about celebrating. It's about, I suppose, like you said, acknowledging what is not normal that we've normalized. And so, and what is strange, I think, especially, you know, when it comes to, black women, is that there are so many black women, right? So one would think that it seems normal. Or when black people are oppressed, it seems like it's a normal thing because there's so many, right? But we are talking about what should not be normal, that has been normalized, and I think that's not acknowledging. And then when it comes to this, for me, so what is the question?
The brutality of exclusion is another form of brutality.
The brutality of exclusion.
And sorry, Khaya,
yes.
I suppose the reason I'm going there is because with Fees Must Fall,
yeah.
the headlines, and I say this as a journalist, the headlines and the pictures that you see of brutality, whether it is alleged that the students attacked the police who had guns and the security guards who had guns, and what you see in the newspaper will be brutality because there's blood, there's bricks, there's stones, there's guns and all of that. And I think behind all of that, and that is the genesis of this turbulence, is a different type of brutality that is neat, that looks good because it's not in your face.
Yeah.
When you go into the NSFAS office or wherever you go and they're telling you goodbye, I'm saying that's the brutality. So I'd like you to speak to it.
That form of brutality is even more brutal than, you know, the burning of police cars. Because you are subjecting an entire generation of people, of a people, to continue to be subjected to poverty, to the fact that you say, like, one of the things that really confuses me, I think, about South Africa, is the fact that we say, we want to get, black industrialists, want to get, black professors, want to get black CEOs, and yet on the other side of the coin, you're like, I'm sorry, I won't let you go to school. I won't let you finish your education.
Right.
How are you going to achieve those goals if you constantly try to exclude people? And the people excluding you look like you. How? How is that not brutal?
Yeah.
Even today, we heard that one said, like, if you get 20% for maths, it's okay. How is that brutal? How is that not brutal to the black child? And for me, what I try to understand, and I cannot understand as much as I try to, is the fact that anger somehow does not seem to be allowed, or only the generations that were before us, like in the 70s and in the 80s, that they were allowed to be angry. So it was okay for them to go and burn things. It was okay for them to go and march, because they were excluded by the system. But then for this generation, it is not okay, because the only reason is that, no, you look like us. And we fought for you. But the truth is, did they fight for us, or did they fight for themselves? Because their children are okay. Their children are going to fancy schools, they are going to China, they're going to America and all of that. But us, we don't have the luxury of having politically connected families or friends who have, lots of money. We don't have all those things. It is, this system is so brutal, but nobody wants to talk about how brutal
it actually is.
Our government is. Don't quote me on that.
The issue of exclusion, and I like the fact that you are not talking about exclusion only in the sense of financial exclusion from university or something like that, but there are other kinds of exclusions that that came out, and I think this is the strength of this moment I'm talking about, that the roads must fall, the fees must fall, period. This moment that is happening, this very powerful thing that is happening here in South Africa today, is that young people have begun to speak a conversation about exclusions we never even thought of, right? Exclusion on the basis of space, right? You're speaking about Foucault right now. I think you're saying something about we read Foucault and all of that and so on, and he writes a lot about space, and I like his work on space, but of course they're colorblind, so they're not sufficient, but he does make some important submissions. He does. Your Foucaults and your Lefebvre's, I think they're great geographers, but of course they've got their limitations. But, at the heart of what these things of your roads must fall and your fees must fall, these movements, is also an exclusion of space, right? So to be excluded from a university does not only mean the university says you're owing us, get out, you can't come in. There are other things that happen in a university that exclude people on a daily basis, right? The fact that an institution of higher learning is named after a particular person already excludes a number of people. If you're a student at Rose University, waking up from Jan Smuts Hall, walking on Prince Andrews Road, going to your class in the Great Hall where there's a statue of some Afrikaner, somebody out there, I don't know who that is, itself it is an excluding process, right? The fact that at Rhodes University, the only, in the Steve Biko, that's really one of the very few progressive buildings you will find in that institution, right? But of course, it's the name of a building, and there's everything else that's problematic inside that building, right? Including the very way the administration is in that building and how it runs things, exclude people and so on. But exclusion for us as young black people in particular is a very deep and a powerful thing, because it's exclusion on so many other levels. Exclusion on the basis of our languages in these high schools, on the basis of our hair, exclusion on the basis of our gender, our sexuality, and so on and so forth. And I think at the heart of, a lot of people argue that, the fees must fall movement became weakened over these past few months. And this is a comfortable space for us to speak. Yes, black people.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. So we can speak about this. So a lot of people argue, we must check the coast, please. Because there are conversations that are very important for black people to have with themselves only, right?
Oh, yes.
We must have these conversations with ourselves. And we must be honest with each other, because we're not going to buy each other, right? You can't do that, that's not why we're here. So a lot of people argue and say, but at the heart of why the fees must fall movement has become so weak over time, it has to do only with the tactics that have been employed over the months and so on and so forth. That's part of the story, right? The other story that is not being spoken about the fees must fall movement by ourselves, students who are part of that movement, and by everybody else who knows about that movement, are the very deep-seated and many layers and levels of exclusion that happens in that movement. Yes. That is fundamentally what divided and weakened the movement long before the issue of anything else came in. Because I can tell you now, as a student who was at Rose University, we had a powerful movement in that institution. At least theoretically, it was so powerful. My God, it was orgasmic. We had BSM at the university, powerful stuff, right? And I remember the first few weeks of BSM and all of that, powerful. The conversations there, my God, I mean, powerful stuff, really, But these powerful movements and spaces of black people begin to die when even amongst ourselves as black people, we want to decide who is more legitimate than the other. And that's exclusion. You understand? So exclusion is not only what happens to us as Redi, it's also what we do to ourselves in these spaces where we excluded people. And for me, there is no bigger example of how exclusion has killed black people in this recent past than what it did in the Fees Must Fall movement. We lost comrades. And I'm not talking about just people, comrades. You know, the word comrade is a serious word, right? I don't just use it like throwing it around, ANC type comrade. No, I mean comrades. I mean, we lost comrades in the Fees Must Fall movement. We lost comrades in the BSM, precisely because we wanted to decide who is more legitimate than the other to be in the space, to speak, to feel, to articulate, and that was an exclusion. And that is the thing about it.
Good evening, everyone.
No.
My name is Mamkele. So I have a question for Khaya. So you spoke about one of your challenges being not having qualification, right? And for me, I find it important that you were on the bestsellers list without that qualification, alongside Mandela and Rico. Obviously, we'd love for it to be more diverse. So many people have written, books in post-apartheid South Africa, black people with many qualifications. And those people with qualifications have responded to your books in very classist ways, some of them, right? And for me, watching the reception to your book was very empowering. Seeing how black people related to your book, tweeting you, Instagramming you from a Hemingway's Mall, from Tanzania, etc., etc. And how black people even stole your book because they wanted it that much. And so, my question then becomes is that how do you think the link between, because education comes with classism, elitism, having a sense of authority, and so even in your writing voice, you speak to people, at people instead of with people, instead of having a conversation. So in your writing process, how do you think that influenced the reception in terms of your tone? Because I think your general tone, you don't speak at people, we speak with people even on social media. There's no hierarchy or form of authority that to me, because I have all of these degrees, etc., my voice is more legitimate. And so how do you think, that influenced the reception of your book? Thank you.
That's a very...
Ask a question.
Okay, I think that's a very good question, because I've never been asked that before. And I honestly think that that's got to do with how I grew up. So, coming from a village, and when I'm 10 years old and I go to this boarding school where entrance guy, where all the kids there, their dads are ministers or this, and I come from this really, really, not great background like everybody else. So you feel like an imposter, you feel like you don't belong. And then the next thing I do, I have to go to this super duper rich white school, and I live in a home where we're sharing a two-roomed house, a four-roomed house with another family, Asnambane, and I'm always so terrified that can't because and as a result, you don't make friends. Then wherever you go, you always feel like you don't belong. And I suspect that might have a lot to do with that, because I constantly feel that I don't belong. But also for me, it's it's that sense of insecurity where I feel like I'm insecure about the fact that I don't have a qualification. The fact that I don't know anything. I know that I don't know. And I also know that I have so much to learn and to pick up from other people. And it comes for me from that place, not to show off how smart I am or how much I know, because I'm not that smart and I don't know that much. And that is, I would say that's probably where it comes from, because it comes from a real place of humility, because I really don't know. It is shocking to me that people would want to read my book in the first place, and let alone steal it. So it's humbling, and I think it's because it comes from a place of where I know that I don't know. And also knowing that I don't deserve to be this place. And a lot of the time people think that I have a story that deserves to be told. I don't know if my story deserves to be told or even heard. But I know that there are lots of people who have the same story as mine. I just happen to have had the privilege, because let's not deny the privilege that I had. One, being a man. Two, the fact that I had, a kind of a followership of some kind, and publishers thought that, okay, maybe we can make money off him, and that's what they did. And people happened to relate to what I said, because I was telling a story that everybody knows, and everybody has gone through, but they know someone who has the same story. And it's like one of the few times that, maybe a black story like that has been told by someone in their generation. I don't know, I don't have the answers. As you can see, there's no answer.
After 10 minutes of speaking, you don't have answers.
Hi, sorry. I don't know whether this is a question or a comment, but it's a response to what's been happening here. Two things. The first is, when we were speaking about the single women and single mothers, and that strong woman rhetoric, I really struggle with the strong woman rhetoric in the sense that I feel like we ourselves need to stop talking about strong women, because I am no stronger than you or him or her. It's just that I've been made a glorified mule. So what happens is, you tell me I'm strong and then you beat me and you see she can take it, look how strong she is, beat her more. Do you understand? And the more we keep talking about this, the more we allow for this constant beating. We need to be, yes, we acknowledge the situations, yes, we say we're surviving, but we shouldn't, this strong women rhetoric is violent, and it allows for more violence. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say was, when we talk about this moment that's happening in South Africa right now, we also talk, there's a large black feminine energy that is very spiritual and rapturing right now, not just here at Abantu, throughout the country. Black women are finding more and more that they have a right to space, they have a right to speak, a right to be alive and to be beautiful and to celebrate themselves. And one of the things I realized just for myself is I started feeling really uncomfortable. The way you were saying that you were like, we're not used to celebrating ourselves or feeling like we're allowed to. And so I started thinking to myself, but are we excluding our black men? And then I started thinking, what kind of conversations can we be having where we can start feeling that kind of balance where we don't feel guilty about celebrating ourselves, but also we don't leave our men behind?
Okay. I must say, I think the first part of your question is what I was trying to get at earlier about, do we celebrate the strength and the ability to ride the wave that threatens to just, throw you out? Do we celebrate that? Are we not normalizing what shouldn't be a normal situation? So I feel that passion, and I think you have answered it as eloquently as you can and made an impression on me that I will reflect on, but perhaps you can take that over.
No, look, I think I've answered the first one, right? Like I said, for me, I don't see a contradiction, and perhaps maybe it's the way in which I read it. I've never seen a contradiction about wanting to celebrate my mother and finding something problematic about a society in which my mother is created. I've never found it to be a contradiction, because I don't think that my mother's strength, by the way, when I celebrate the strength of my mother, for me in particular, I don't just celebrate my mother because of the challenges she was overcome. It is not only, I think often when we speak about strength, we speak about strength in response to challenge, right? But we don't speak about strength in response to many other things, right? beautiful things, right? So my mother's strength, for example, does not arise from the fact that she was only a single parent and she had to raise me, she went through all these difficulties and so on. One of the strong things about my mother that many people don't know, she's a beautiful writer. And that's a strength. She's a great writer. My mother is a brilliant mind. And that has nothing to do with struggle, right? So her being strong, it encompasses so many aspects of her being. And her being and her strength can't only be defined by struggle. And that's the thing about Black life and its complexity, that within that struggle, within that suffering and so on and so forth, there are also so many other aspects. We are not just single beings. You know, a strong woman is not just a woman who has suffered. There are so many other aspects to this woman that define what is strength. And so I cannot decide that I'm only going to speak about her strength, only about the good things, but so many other things. For me, she's a strong person, and it encompasses everything else. Beautiful, tragic, sad, painful, lovely, sexy, and everything else, you know? And I choose to define her that way. I choose to.
I'm smiling because you just theorized, you know? You just got exactly that inadvertently. And then the second part of your question, I think, was about leaving black men behind. Eh? How do we move forward without
feeling guilty?
Without feeling guilty. Okay, who wants to take that? I'm not answering questions because I'm
She can, you know. But she can, She can next. Do we agree that she can? Yes, she can.
No, I didn't prepare for that.
Nobody did.
You knew I was going to ask you.
You threw us over the edge. You threw us over the edge. So you can take this.
I'll come back to it. Where's the next question?
Hi, my name is Asana. Firstly, I'd just like to say thank you to people like you, writers. I won't say why or how I'm thankful, but just know that I am. And then the second part is I'm interested in how your relationship with your parents and how you connect with them has changed over time. I'll take my personal example is that the three words that would describe my relationship with my parents would be awe, sadness, and anger. Or being a child who looks up to your parent who's this infallible individual who knows everything. Sadness when you grow up and you learn what they've gone through because you've personally experienced it, and you're sad because you're seeing your childhood through different eyes and understanding things differently. And then thirdly would be anger in terms of once you understand some of the decisions that your parents have made, is hoping that they would have made better decisions and how to deal with that anger. And I'll just make a small example, like, for example, my father, he felt what was more important was discipline more than love. And then we are at a stage where he's now older and he yearns for that loving, but there is no language. We don't have that language between the two of us. So I'm interested in your examples in terms of how has your relationship with your parents changed and how has that affected you?
Wow. Let me give you an example because I don't really have, for example, a story about my father because it's interesting because I actually realized this year why I did not enjoy birthdays. On my birthday specifically, is because on my 6th birthday, when my mother made this big birthday, guava juice, knickknacks, and so now, and we're celebrating, having a great time in the afternoon. It's my 6th birthday. In the afternoon, I hear Abantu Book Festival locked in some room, and they're all crying. And they're just being told that my father is dead. And, he lived in Joburg, and so he was not coming anyway. And so for him, I couldn't really say what kind of relationship that I had with him. But my grandfather, I'll never forget, he was also a strict disciplinarian, very strict. And I'll never forget one time when Dlanga, and I have no idea where this cow is. I've counted all of them, name by name, but this cow is not there. So we've locked it up at about 6:30, and I am this 8-year-old boy, and I'm walking around this dark village. I've got lights. And I'm walking, I come back at 10 because I can't find the car. Come back. My grandfather is there sitting on the veranda. It's dark and he says, Mama dinner balad! And I was and he says, Income be 10. Income be 10. What am I going to say if something happened to you, Zautini?
Yeah.
Now, as a child, you don't think that.
Yeah.
You think that all he thinks about is discipline. So you only connect it later, like, oh my God, he actually loves it more than he loves his cows.
Yeah.
I never thought this was possible, right? So that was the first lesson I think I got from my grandfather. Okay, it's okay if I lose a cow now. But of course I never did. And then when it comes to my mother, because she had to leave because my father passed away and start working. And I mean, she was this beautiful, like gorgeous, gorgeous woman. My mother was beautiful. And when she'd come to visit us as Lali, I'd be so afraid of touching her because she had these long nails, they're done up, and she's like all, hair, and she's dressed in pants, and she is like, I mean, I didn't see women dressed in pants in my village. And I'm like, yo, what did the Moega looked? So, and I felt like if I touched her, I would be tainting her somehow. So, as a child, I had this very distant relationship with her because I didn't know how to relate to her because she was this figure that was there. And so when I grew a little bit older and I had to live with her, I still couldn't get close with her. I was still afraid of her. And I didn't know when she asked me a question, I didn't know how to answer her. And one time, I'll never forget, she was asking me, my uncle, because I said, I responded to him very flippantly. And I thought I said, so I don't know how to answer. And I think she's asking that question because but what she's saying to me is, why are you so familiar with your uncle, right? And I couldn't answer the question. She says, so she gets pissed off because I'm not answering her. But for me, I don't have that relationship with her because she lived so far. And so later on in life, I started working, and I would literally call her every single day. Speak to her for a good 40 minutes, an hour on the phone, and I speak to her every day, and I became really, really, really close to her when I got older. And I never got angry with her, I think, because I was like, and I could never understand other children who were angry at their parents for being poor, as if their parents made the choice to be poor, whereas the system made the choice for them to be poor. And so, things like, if there's a derby day, I'll never tell my mother that there's a derby day because I didn't want her to, I'm next door so that I could go to the derby. I'd rather get a detention than ask her to go and do that. So I was constantly thinking about her, but I think it's also because I felt like, I am responsible for her suffering because I'm a child. And so for me, I think that was, and the fact that she still had this great sense of humor should make us laugh, should make us, forget what is going on. But my relationship with her really changed and became a lot closer when I got, a lot older.
Okay, we have run out of time, and I will take up the challenge to attempt an answer to the last question, Eyako. It isn't a perfect answer, but this is what I'm feeling at the moment. I think my reaction to that question, how do we do what we do without leaving the men behind? It is an emotional response, but I say that without any shame, because I don't subscribe to the notion that emotions are inferior to logic. For me, I'm not one without the other. A lot of things in my life, in my family, would not have been a success, would not have happened if the women around me had paused to think about how they take the men with them. I probably wouldn't be sitting here doing what I do. My mother would not have been doing what she's been able to do if she'd paused. This is in a personal space, perhaps it's also political as well. If she'd paused to reflect on how far behind the men were. I'm thinking about the dispossession. I'm thinking about migrant labor and the men leaving their homes and their farms and the women keeping things together. If they had paused to reflect on how this impacts on maleness, on men, on society, nothing would have been a success. Having said that though, I do think the answer is to fight. I can take the armed struggle, for example. It was an aspect of a broad war. And I think that we fight in ways that we're able to, whether through the pen, proverbial pen, the words that we write, the words we speak, our deeds. That is a war, that is a fight. And you said earlier that you don't think you can teach, because racism is structural. You can't undo it by, to paraphrase what you say, maybe clumsily, by teach. You can't make someone stop it. I think that's what you said. However, I do think that personal beliefs can be challenged, and you can teach and you can demonstrate in your home, whether you're raising boys or you're raising girls. And I'm saying you as in men and women, because it's not our job to raise these boys. The men must be present as well. So you fight and you teach. But the third aspect is, I don't know that we have the luxury to pause and think about it too much. This ultra marathon is long, it is far, the destination is far. We just keep running, and you know what? You must follow or stay. Okay, Redi, I'm sorry, I'm out of time. And this is the only book festival I've attended where there's a newborn in the room, so I'm bringing mine tomorrow. That's it about the intimacy. Thank you all so much. You're a wonderful audience, and thank you, Malaika and Khaya. Thank you. I've learned so much.
The definition of